Hey everyone, welcome to the latest Sleepy vlog. This is going to mostly be about the convention I went to about a week and a half ago now called I Like Comic Con. Somehow that's hard to say. It was a focused on comics only, supposedly. There was a little bit of wiggle room there. Convention that is brand new. This is the first year in Vancouver, Washington. Put together by the owner of a comic book shop called I Like Comics in Vancouver. And it was in kind of a, what do they call it, an exhibition hall, kind of a giant shed, but nicer than a shed, but a giant space on a county fairground. And you can see some of, I put a clip or a series of clips put together at the end of my last comic book thoughts because I'm too lazy to do it to go with this video. So anyway, I was quite excited because it's solely focused on comics, and I particularly went wanting to go to the panels and to talk to creators, talk the artists, do the artist alley kind of thing. And the artist alley part was pretty successful for me. The panels were pretty iffy, although by the end there were a few panels that I definitely felt were worth my while going to. And I did buy a bunch of comics there, most of which I showed in the live haul I did 2 videos back. And the cool thing about that is I learned about a relatively new comic book shop in the town called Gladstone, which is not too far away from me. So I plan to go visit them sometime in the future. And they said they had a whole back room full of 50-cent books, which is like both heaven and hell because I'll buy so many comics and I need to start making choices. But I love digging through the 50-cent boxes and just having that adventure of discovering medium old stuff that no one wants that I want. So, and another one I chatted with who seemed really nice were people who owned a comic book shop down in Eugene, Oregon, which I don't get down to too often, but you never know. Be good to have a bunch of different things to do down in Eugene, and stopping by a comic book shop would be one of them. Sounded like they were also a science fiction bookstore, which I definitely enjoy going to a used science fiction bookstore. Or any science fiction bookstore, because there aren't many left. I mean, that has something that really died long before comic book shops have kept going. It's funny, 2 of the main long-running comic book shops here in Portland in the 90s billed themselves as bookstores that also carried comic books, although really they had a science fiction book section and then a huge comic book selection, but they really wanted to be identified as bookstores, and slowly they got rid of the books entirely. Like Excalibur used to be Excalibur Books and Comics, now it's just Excalibur Comics. And I used to buy science fiction books there. I guess there was a period, where comics, I keep burping, weren't selling that well, and they were like renting DVDs and stuff in the back of Excalibur Comics. But I'm getting way off on a divergence. I thought I'd mention a few interesting podcasts. One, before I dive into talking about the con, one that I really think everyone would like to listen to is who's interested in the history of the Bronze Age of comics and the late Silver, I guess, Bronze fandom and everything. And is another one of Scott Edelman's, what's it called? Eating the Fantastic, where he has a meal and records the conversation of the meal with a science fiction professional, writer, or editor, and now he's incorporating some comics people. And the first person he incorporated was Marv Wolfman, who he worked for as an assistant editor back at Marvel. They have an interesting, sometimes awkward conversation. One of the most interesting parts was about Marv Wolfman's early job at DC, I think before he was even a pro, like just as a volunteer or intern, to cut up art cut up the original art to throw out, and how he saved one of, and I guess it's kind of famous that he saved a Kurt Swan story, and now that Kurt Swan story is going to be published in Action 1000, I believe. So what he did is he cut it out panel by panel and took the panels home with him, and now they are, I assume, going to reconstruct the panels and finally publish this story. I may have that wrong. I don't guarantee that I have that story right. But anyway, it's really interesting hearing Scott and Marv Wolfman talk. I'd mentioned quite a while ago, but just to remind you also, there's a really incredible interview that also relates to comics with George R.R. Martin. They hardly talk about Game of Thrones. They focus on Martin's early life as a comic book fan and how that led him into writing and all the fanzines he was involved with and all of that. And it's a fascinating one too. I'll try to, since I'm traveling, it might be a while, but I'll try to put the links to both of those podcasts down below. And I know that Scott's planning to do more with comics professionals. Scott got his start in writing in comics and then moved on to horror fiction and science fiction and fantasy, and has been an editor in a lot of different kinds of magazines and capacities. So definitely a guy who's connected to the world of science fiction and the world of comics in many, many ways. Just the other day, I was listening, there's a new book, and I've downloaded it on Audible. Maybe I'll listen to it on this trip. A book about comic book shops and the business of comic book shops. There was an interesting interview with the author of that book on Off Panel. And gosh, there's been so many other podcasts. I kind of wish I was giving you my weekly podcast report on what I've been listening to. Darn, now I can't think of many of the others. Maybe it'll come to me later. But let's move on to the convention. So it was a small convention in a big space, in this giant sort of exhibition hall shed. And so it felt very empty. I don't know if it was as empty as it felt. But one thing that really hurt the panel things, since it was just all one giant space, they had an area where they pulled the curtains partially closed to kind of section off an area a little bit, and they had a stage and rows of seats and this sound system that seemed fairly big and sophisticated, but didn't work very well at all in the giant shed space. And many of the panels were sparsely attended, and they seemed really sparse in this giant space. And the convention did not have even a one-page program that would list what the panels were or tell you anything about guests and the like, or have a map or anything. And there wasn't and in the area where they had the panel, there wasn't even a sign there saying what panel is now or a list of all the panels. There was, on the other end of the shed, there was one booth that had a sign saying what the panels were and what time they were, and just the names of the panel and the times, no explanation of them. And they had done a misprint where they reprinted the same panels for Saturday and Sunday, and then later someone taped over a piece of paper showing the proper Sunday panels. Now, on their website, there was some information about the panels, although a lot of it, the panels ended up having different guests than were claimed to be on the website, or to a degree. And since I couldn't get any cell reception inside the convention hall, I couldn't double-check the website to really check back and forth. There was a guy on several panels who was interesting to me only because I watched ETA Nick and have learned all about slabbing and grading and everything else, who, I guess, according to him anyway, worked with CGC when they first started their grading system and their slabbing system, and now he is founded his own company, CBCS, which has gotten funding from some big company, and so now they have lots of money to work on their projects. My computer just put itself to sleep. Got a little coffee cup I can click. There we go. Now it won't fall asleep again. So even though I have yet to find a situation where I want to get a comic book slabbed, I found all that talk very interesting. On one of the panels he was on was billed as being the history of comics and the history of collecting, but it wasn't quite that. But anyway, it had someone who, along with Bud Plant, said that they think they founded the first comic book store in 1968 somewhere in San Francisco or in San Francisco area, I think it was, Berkeley maybe, or somewhere in California. And then, of great interest to me, they had the founder of Lone Star Comics and now mycomicshop.com. And I asked this panel of people. There was also another person who was a grader at CBCS for international comics. And I asked this panel if they thought, what they thought about the future of key issues. It seems like the prices of key issues keep going up at a faster speed than the price of everything else, or maybe the price of everything else is going down, and whether they thought that price differential would continue on up. And it's funny because the first guy who answered me, which was the founder of CBCS, he just gave me which is a perfectly good lecture, but not what I was asking for, the little talk on buy what you can afford and don't buy what you can't afford, which is great. But I was curious if they had any thoughts about that, since it's something that bothers me. I think that the underlying implication of his answer was, yes, that price differential is going to continue to go up. And the reason I asked that is because if I really want to collect a run, then maybe I should buy the key issues now rather than waiting and hoping to find a good deal on them later on down the line. And I think also he was thinking of even more expensive key issues than I was thinking of, like Amazing Fantasy number 15 or whatever. Whereas I was thinking about, should I pull the trigger on Conan number 1, or, do I want to try to get the first appearance of the Punisher? Or I probably will never bother with that. But you know what I mean. So for me, it's smaller key issues that are getting in the way of my runs usually, that I would like to collect. And then it felt like all the other panelists responded to that. The guy Buddy, who does Lone Star Comics, himself said he does not like slabbed comics. And even the guy who started CBCS said when CGC first came to him, he thought it was a crazy idea. And he says he told them they had to do things that you could reopen, so that you could if you chose in the future to read your comic, you could, but that it was not tamper-proof, so that you would see that it had been broken open, I guess. From what I've seen of people opening things on YouTube's, it doesn't seem like it's that easy to open it. Then there was so the big star of the show was Jim Steranko, and throughout, especially on Saturday, but also on Sunday, he always had a long line snaking around to his table, and he had a panel spotlight on Jim Steranko. And even though there were these huge lines constantly to pay money to get his autographs, there was a much smaller number than, like, say at any given time there were 50 people in his line, there might have been 40 people at the panel that was spotlighting him. And he had his kind of crony friend, whatever, come out, kind of like the blues star who has their band play first before they come out on stage or after a song or two. He had this other guy come out and talk, and then he made his grand entrance, but the number of people and the acoustics and everything did not go well with what he was doing, and the two of them did all this shtick telling bad jokes, and his sidekick even would go ba-bum-tsh to emphasize the jokes, but the jokes were just not going over. But then the panel got a lot better when Steranko dived into a couple long stories. One about this supposed one day that where, out of the blue, he presented himself to all these comic book companies and they all offered him different kinds of jobs. And, it was, the more I thought about it after the panel, it was preposterous. There was no way this story was true. And you would think from the story that the very first place his comics appeared in was Marvel, whereas I know they had first appeared at Charlton, and that his first comics at Marvel were, laid out by Jack Kirby. He wasn't, didn't dive right in. Although he did say, and I kind of believe this maybe, that Stan Lee said, well, you're a really exciting artist, new artist, but I don't have anything for you. Right, I don't need new artists, but I'm going to give you something because I don't want you to end up at DC, which was ironic because actually Steranko had already turned DC down, who, according to him, only wanted him to write and not draw. All of this based on some art samples that he was bringing around to people. I'm not going to tell the whole story. There's probably versions of it online. Steranko specifically asked that people not film or do flash photography at his panel, and made some reference to having a film deal or something, so he didn't want all of these stories getting out there until he does the film, I guess. He didn't say that specifically, but he kind of, or maybe his sidekick implied that. Anyway, once he got into his tall tale telling, it was a lot of fun. But there's a part of me, as the fan of comics history, who wants his honest comic book history of his experience in comics and not his showman's story. But I don't know if we'll ever get that. It'd be great if he wrote a memoir. And I had initially thought, I'll go there, and when I get my chance, I'll talk to Steranko about comic scene and media scene, the magazines about comics and other pulpy media that he became the publisher and editor of, that he created himself. But I never got my chance. I had been kind of sick before the convention, and I thought I was better. But spending the whole day on Saturday at the convention, I felt really yucky afterwards. I had a bad headache during much of it. And on Sunday, the headache really lingered on with me. And so I wasn't... That headachy feeling kind of added to my natural introversion, and introversion is hard to explain. I mean, my version of it, I don't think I'm a shy person or anything like that, but sometimes I just don't feel like talking. And sometimes I just don't have the energy for it. And and I don't like crowds and all that kind of thing. It sucks the energy out of me, crowds do. So add in that a headache. But despite that, I did talk to a lot of people, and the person that I was most excited about anyway was Mike Royer. And I went to his table, and he had all this stuff for sale, and you could tell he wasn't getting much attention. And I love Jack Kirby, as you know, and my favorite Jack Kirby inker is Mike Royer. So to me, he's a big deal. In a way, it was more exciting to meet him than to meet Neil Adams or hang out near Jim Steranko. And he certainly was just a very genuine person. I really liked him. And he had all these giant artist editions that I already own that he wanted to sell at 20% off with a personalized signature on it. And it's like, I wish I didn't already own these, but they're so expensive to buy them again just to have his signature. I'm not crazy about signatures, but, and he said, I hope someone buys them from me. I don't want to have to carry them all back with me. And I did buy something from him. The only thing I didn't already have. I could have gotten all this stuff signed by Mike Royer, and if I had it, so we had a really good conversation. I personally, anyway, just really liked the guy, and would have loved to have talked to him more. And I'm sure I could have circled back to his table and talked to him some more. But I felt like if I came back a few hours later, he probably wouldn't remember me and that I'd already bought stuff from him. So what I bought was Jack Kirby, The Spirit World, which is some odd magazine. I don't know if it was ever published at all, or maybe one issue was published when he first started at DC. He was going to do a series of black and white magazines, one about the mob and one called The Spirit World, so I guess about psychic phenomenon that he was going to edit and contribute to, but kind of bring in a lot of other people too. There's Sergio Aragones in here, and I can't find the credits. Anyway, I think there's a Neil Adams in here even. Kind of fascinating stuff. So Mike Royer signed this for me, sold it to me for 20% off. Comic best wishes to Damien from Mike Royer. And then we talked about how he'd worked for Disney for a long time, and was in particular, he was a Winnie the Pooh artist. And I was going to come back and buy his video where he teaches other artists how to properly draw the Disney Winnie the Pooh. But anyway, I bought this print from him of the only character he said that he ever created by himself, called Aniki, who is hugging Mickey Mouse there. And he sold this to me for $3, or most of his prints were $3 and this one was $4. I was hoping he would have like some drawings he'd done, like I've seen online, things where he has recreated Kirby covers for people. But I'm not sure if he still is really drawing and inking that much anymore. He didn't seem that old to me, but I guess he had hearing aids in both ears, and some other artist walked by while I was talking to him and said, "He's the oldest one in this whole place." And I said, "No, he's not that old," because I don't know what else to say. And he said, "Oh yes, he is." And Mike Royer was supposed to be in one of the panels, and I thought I would go to the panel and then afterwards maybe I would try to talk to him again. But I went to the panel and Mike Royer wasn't on it. And to me, along with Neil Adams and Jim Steranko, Mike Royer those were the top 3 guests at the place, and they all should have been on panels. Neil Adams wasn't on a panel either. I did have a little chat with Neil Adams, and he was very friendly. There weren't a lot of people in his booth right at that moment. And one of the guys assisting him is someone I know from my comic book shop. And I had got, last con I went to, I'd gotten some Neil Adams prints, and if you watch every single video I make, you might remember that I failed to get Neil Adams signatures then because he had just left after I picked out the prints and I had to leave to go home. So this time I did get a Neil Adams signature, but not on a print, on a sketchbook. And I wanted to buy more sketchbooks, but I guess his sketchbooks were sold out, so there was just this one. Let me see, which bag do I have in? It's just a comic book size sketchbook. And he was telling me how, unlike other people's sketchbooks, which are just collections of their commissions, his are all kinds of different things. And he puts a lot of process stuff in them. So I wish I could have grabbed some more of his sketchbooks. I think this one he charged $10 for. And there's the To Damien from Neil Adams. But I was joking around with him about how I kept finding all these Neil Adams covers that I never knew existed on these Silver Age Superman family comics, like Supergirl and Superboy and all of that. And he said, well, don't blame me that I'm not the artist on the inside. So I guess he gets people complaining all the time about how they picked up comics with Neal Adams covers but didn't get Neal Adams art on the inside, which is perfectly fine with me now, although when I was a little boy, that really did bother me. So I wish I'd been a little less shy. I'd heard that Neal Adams can be grumpy and stuff, so I didn't want to bother him too much, but really I think he would have been happy to talk quite a bit longer. But I hadn't mentally prepared in my head any questions I might want to ask him, and things didn't pop up too naturally. Right in front of us were some pages from The Rise of the Supermen, which was his Superman meets the New Gods kind of story that he did like a year ago. And the art in person looked really fantastic, and I was telling him how great that looked, and said something about all the people who've imitated his style and stuff. And anyway, he was really nice, and I wish I'd figured out how to talk to him more, but I did get to chat with him a little bit, so there's that. I always thought Neal Adams would look more like a Neal Adams character. I always imagined him like one of these Batman poses, this slinky guy. But he looks more like, I don't know, an old used car salesman or something. In a good way. But anyway, I enjoyed meeting him. I really enjoyed meeting Mike Royer. I talked to some other artists who, it's funny, I ended up shying away from some artists who I knew who they were, but I kept thinking, well, later I'll think of something to say to them, or they were often busy chatting with each other, but I thought I'd go by their table and look for prints, but somehow, I guess because I wasn't feeling well, I let some of that slip by, like Leila Del Duca, and Steve Lieber, and Ron Randall. Several times I've wanted to talk with Ron Randall, but I'm not that familiar with his work. I just know that that Paulo loves Ron Randall's work. And I remember his work from 70s and 80s DC, but it just doesn't stand out strongly to me. And I've been meaning to read his tracker. So he lives in Portland, and he seems to go to all the events. So maybe I will get another chance to talk with him. Let's see, who else did I talk to? I talked with Loprenzi. What's his first name? Aaron Loprenzi, who has done Wonder Woman and a lot of DC books, and I actually remember his work from back in like the Ultraverse or something too. But I chatted with him about his work on Amethyst, and he talked about how that was one of the hardest comics he ever had to draw because he had to design so much stuff from scratch. And I was telling him how much I really liked it, and I thought he really sold that book and everything. And he agreed, or he brought it up, I didn't, about how they had priced that comic wrong and tried to make it more like an anthology comic book at a higher price, and that it didn't have that good of a shot anyway, and particularly coming out the New 52 with so many new comics coming out at the same time. But it clearly was a labor of love for him. And I was looking through his art. I was even thinking of buying an original art page. Then this other guy, I'm not sure who it was, some other pro came along and kind of like almost edged me away so that I was off to the edge of the table so that he could tell jokes to Aaron Loprenzi. And I didn't hold it against Aaron or anything, but I just, it was harder for me to think about what I might want to buy, or there were some prints, and I thought, I'll just come back and do it later. But with more time, I thought, do I really want to buy an original piece of art of his? It was it's not that expensive for original art, but it was pretty expensive. And so I talked myself out of it, and I didn't go back to his table. But yeah, he was not nearly as friendly or likable as, say, Mike Royer. And then I talked to some other people who I didn't really know who they were. But I think this guy might be a fairly successful comic book artist, because later I found out his wife is a well-known editor. She was on one of the panels, and I ended up buying this sketch of his print of his for a very small amount of money. I can't remember, maybe $15, maybe $10. But it's this great cutaway picture of the Fortress of Solitude, and the picture itself tells a whole story, because inside are Bizarro and Lex Luthor and Brainiac, and they've captured Batman and Robin and Superman and some of the Legion of Superheroes, and Supergirl are about to enter the fortress. So it's about to be kind of a showdown, and the picture's just very clever with all the bits of the fortress it shows. I had him sign it for my daughter, but now she's not interested. She wants to take all the Supergirl stuff out of her girl cave, out of her bedroom, and replace it with My Little Pony stuff. In fact, I should have mentioned this at the top, but my daughter has started her own YouTube channel. Though she shows her face on my channel, she's not going to show her face on her channel. It's called MLP Spoof Productions. So if anyone knows someone who's interested in My Little Pony, maybe there could be a My Little Pony community. The stuff she watches are these huge channels that have hundreds of thousands of views per video, where they discuss the philosophy of My Little Pony or whatever. And I guess the algorithms of YouTube really do make it hard. She never sees the smaller My Little Pony channels, which there must be ones like her. So I'll put the link below if for some reason you're interested, or you know a kid who's interested can take a look at her videos. She does them without any coaching from me, except I help set up the camera, or in one of them I held the camera manually while she unboxed some stuff. We'll see how long this My Little Pony phase goes on for. She got all these My Little Pony books for Christmas. It's a big world building kind of thing. It's not like the My Little Pony from the 80s, I guess. And it's still ongoing. There's another season coming out. The movie was a big disappointment. Really did not go with the spirit of My Little Pony. But anyway, I just have My Little Pony playing in the background all the time as I'm reading comic books. So, another big person to me that I talked with, and it was semi-successful. There was a woman there with him, I assume his wife, and she was very nice and kind of keeping him focused. Maybe he has trouble at conventions too. Was Paul Gulacy. So I bought 2 small prints from him, because he mostly had small to medium-sized prints, and none of the medium-sized prints grabbed me, but these small ones really did. So there's a really cool Master of Kung Fu one, and I think it's basically a shrunken down cover that he did at some point for Marvel, maybe for some reprint series or something. And then I don't know if it says 2015, if this was a cover on any Batman comic, or where it comes from, this Batman and Catwoman picture, but I like that one too, so I grabbed it. These, I think he was selling these for $5, or maybe it was $10. I can't remember now. And then I bought The Art of Paul Gulacy, this art book, which I think is probably out of print. I haven't seen it around before, but I look forward to looking through it more thoroughly and reading whatever write-ups are in here. The interesting thing is, I think one of the editors of this is J. David Spurlock, who was kind of Jim Steranko's sidekick for his show. So I guess maybe he's an editor or a comic historian or something. So yeah, I was really happy to get a hold of this. Maybe it's not out of print, I don't know. They sold it to me just for the cover price, and he signed it. They seemed nice, but they seemed like they were hoping to make, you could get the vibe they were there to make money, which I don't blame them at all. Paul Gulacy is not at the center of comics anymore, even though I think he should be. I still think he's not the same as the old Paul Gulacy, but I think he's still a very good comics artist, judging by the Rook series he did a year ago. And I tried to engage him more about the Rook, and it was pretty clear the Rook was not going to continue and maybe was not that big of a success, but he was proud that the estate of the owners of the Rook, was it Will Dubé or someone like that, asked for him and Stephen Grant to be the ones to do it, and they did it. So I don't know, I felt like he was kind of distracted, and he was right next to Steranko, so he had that giant line going by him all the time, which might be kind of weird because at least at some point in his career he was a heavily influenced or Steranko imitator, if you will. So it's funny that he was right next to Steranko. Steranko was a rock star. I mean, it was the Steranko con. Nothing else was getting much attention than Steranko, which brings me back to being shocked at how small his panel was, or how sparsely attended his panel was. The most attended panel that I went to, and I went to almost all of them, was the Wonder Woman panel. So that shows the power, I think, of the movie. And the guests on the Wonder Woman, there were supposed to be more guests on the Wonder Woman panel, I'm pretty sure from my memory of the website, but it was just Aaron Loprenzi and Gail Simone. And that was a really fun panel. It was very good for me. There was a lot of interesting stuff about how Gail Simone works and how Aaron Loprenzi felt working with her. And but the moderator was sure that the real issue was that there was all this stuff that Gail Simone wanted to do with Wonder Woman that DC Comics wouldn't let her. And if that was the case, Gail Simone was not going to admit it. She said, no, I could do whatever I want. I got to do what I wanted with Wonder Woman. I think, did her run get ended earlier than she wanted? I might have had a little bit of the feeling of that. She seemed very happy working with Aaron Loprenzi. He seemed very happy working with her. I do wonder if the relative crowd that came to that panel might have been a little disconcerted to have it really be a panel about Gail Simone when they came for Wonder Woman. Maybe they should have tried to talk more about Wonder Woman in general, along with their specific experience doing Wonder Woman. But anyway, it was a really good panel, and I learned more about Gail Simone and Aaron Loprenzi. I did actually have a conversation with Gail Simone, but it was during the short period of the con when I was with my daughter, and she kind of wandered over to Gail Simone's table, and we were looking at her scripts, and she tried to engage my daughter, which was really nice of her, and my daughter was difficult and was not letting her engage with her. She asked my daughter if my daughter wanted to be a writer. My daughter does want to be a writer. My daughter said no. Just flat out, no, I'm not interested in that. I thought this would happen at 13, but it's happening at 9. We're just having a lot of orneriness. Hopefully more with grown-ups than with kids, I hope. I don't mind if she's rude to grown-ups as long as she has kid friends. Although there are times, like I brought her to my office, and I wish she had been a little nicer to the people who were buying Girl Scout cookies from her. Let's put it that way. But not that she was horrible in any way, but I probably have high standards of friendliness and being nice to people. So let's see. yeah, Simone was selling scripts, and do I want to buy? Look, they were signed like, out of 100, like she was only going to sell 100 copies of that script, and she would sign it. There was a Commandy Challenge script there, and I told her how I liked the job she'd done on Commandy Challenge and how I thought it had become kind of a mess, and she seemed to kind of agree, but said it was a really fun project to be part of. And I wanted to come back and look at what other scripts she had there, but I just never did. And I couldn't decide whether I would want to buy a script. I think they were either $20 or $25. But I would have liked to talk to her some more, but I'm not sure what I would talk to her about. I haven't been reading many of her comics lately, because other than the Commandy, they've been like over at Dynamite or whatever other thing she's doing. She's doing the Conan Wonder Woman right now, which I might read after the fact, but I don't have a lot of interest in per se. Anyway, I think by the second day my diffidence had kicked in, and so I just didn't follow up on that plan to go back and talk to Gail Simone. I talked to, again, mostly on the first day, I think. Oh, let's see. Here. I'm just looking through the bag of goodies. I bought an I Like Comic-Con shirt. It's fairly generic, but kind of a nice, I like t-shirts. It's nice to have, especially if I Like Comic-Con continues and maybe every year has a different shirt, then that would be cool that I had the shirt from the first year. So I bought a number of people who had tables with their self-published comic. One was this one, Kinetic. I haven't had time to read any of these, so I bought the first 4 issues. I think he said he had a plan for 7 issues total. He made some reference to, how his house is becoming a warehouse full of the comics he's publishing. He said he gets them printed in China and they take 6 weeks to come over on a barge, and that sort of thing. So it sounded like he was spending a lot of money on it, and I think he was hiring the artists. At least the covers, they look like fairly professional comic book covers. The interior art looks decent for a self-published comic. Coloring's pretty good for a self-published comic. So I'm kind of looking forward to reading it, see what someone does with superheroes. But what got me when I was talking to him, he was a nice guy and I had fun talking to him, but he said that he doesn't really read individual issues himself, and that he reads comics on Hoopla and on Marvel Unlimited. And it seemed a little sad to me, but he might have just been saying that, and he might still be buying other indie comics or something, or picking them up digitally at least. I don't know. But it struck me as telling of the times that he's selling individual issues and going to all this trouble to go to cons, but he himself just reads them in the cheapest possible way digitally. Then there was this guy who was very enthusiastic about his series about the Knights Templar. And suddenly I realized, I think I bought this. My comic book store used to have a local comic artist section. I think I bought this already. Well, now I have the second issue. And I got them both signed. The art looks pretty good. It was the writer selling things. The lettering doesn't look that great. That's often the downfall of the amateur comic, right? Is the lettering just doesn't look that good. Done with a computer. But he was really excited and felt that he had this unique take on Knights Templars, so I was caught up in the excitement of talking with him. And then there's this guy who'd been done a lot of self-published comics. What's his name? there's Monty in his name, but I think it's in his last name. Where's his actual name here? T. Warren Montgomery. Anyway, this stuff looked pretty good. He had 3 volumes of collected of his comic, and I shallowly chose to get the 3rd volume because it had color. And he gave me this thing to buy stuff from him online with a discount code. 15% off. Anyway, so I haven't got to read that. And then this person, what is his? Bohemian Comics, some of which he draws and some of which he writes. I liked. He seemed like an old hippie. Some of his comics had kind of an old underground vibe, but this one is his tribute to Kirby. So that, of course, caught my attention. I had a really good conversation with him. I now can't remember all of it. We talked comics. These other ones had kind of, to me, one's called The Protectors and one's called the Dim-Witted Deflectors and The Pathetic Protectors. And just flipping through it at the con, I kind of thought of Wonder Warthog, that old underground comic thing that was making fun of Superman and other superheroes. In one of these, I thought the art looked a bit like Wonder Warthog, but now I'm not finding it. So I'm actually looking forward to reading these. Again, too many comics, not enough time. I hope to read a bunch of trades on my travels. Let's see if there's anything else that I haven't. There's the Con Pass. So the thing that that Mike Royer should have been part of was about the process of making comics, and it was an interesting panel. They had an editor, they had a writer who was Chris Sabella. The editor was Bob Schreck. I kind of liked Bob Schreck. He was very cynical and stuff. I liked him. Chris Sabella. Then as an artist, as the penciler, they had Pete Woods, who's currently doing Justice League, although I figured out after a while Pete Woods actually draws, pencils, inks, and colors his own comics, except when he has an emergency and then someone else colors it. And then they had an inker, and then they had a colorist. And I guess they meant to have a letterer, or I'm not sure, but there was no letterer. But a bunch of interesting things came out in that, but the ones that stand out in my mind right now is Bob Schreck talked about one of the most horrible experiences he had working in comics, which was with, I hope I get the name right, Bill Dubay, who I think was a big writer and maybe editor at Warren Comics. And this was a while back, probably quite a while back, because Carmine Infantino was supposed to be the artist on this comic. And I guess this was a smaller comic book company, maybe in the 90s or 80s or something, and they were all excited to have Bill Dubay writing for them. And I may have some of these facts wrong because I'm just telling you off the top of my head. Anyway, Dubay turned in the first script and it was decent, and Carmine Infantino started drawing it, and then the second script came in for the second issue, and everything had been changed and moved around, and things were starting to get really creepy. And he said then by the third script he'd changed everything yet again, and things were getting super disturbing, and he said if we published it, we'd all get arrested. And Carmen Infantino said, I can't work on this any longer, and they killed the comic. And I think craziness ensued. There was some... He was vague about it. And also now it's a week and a half since the panel. And then another little tidbit was the inker was talking about how he would spend a whole bunch of time doing cross-hatchings on, say, a shoulder of somebody or a superhero or something. And then the colorist would come along and put a dark brown color over it, and no one could see his cross-hatching. And he said, so I don't do cross-hatching anymore. And that went right up my alley for things that I'm worried about, that the wrong colorists can ruin comics. And then the colorist presumably was not the colorist who had ruined the guy's cross-hatching. He was talking about coloring, and I asked this question. I asked, does the artist choose the colorist these days? Or does the editor choose the colorist, or how does that happen? And the colorist said that except on one job, he always got the job by the artist recommending him. And I said, I followed up and said, so is the artist really your audience? Is that really the person you have to please? And he kind of hemmed and hawed and said, yeah, well, I guess that is true. I mean, the editor has to like my work too. But so really there's kind of this, because Bob Schreck had talked about how they usually try to get the inker that the artist requests. So there's kind of, that the penciler requests. So there's kind of this group of people, like the inkers and now the colorists, who follow the penciler around, I think, or the penciler inker. And a lot of people are penciler inkers now. But so the interaction of all those things is very interesting to me. Another interesting thing was Chris Sabella talking. Well, he kept saying, oh, writing is the easiest thing. I don't like Chris Sabella's writing that much. I've read some stuff that was good, but I always, in the end, didn't quite work for me. And so I thought, well, maybe, Chris Sabella, you're not working hard enough on your writing. Yeah, I don't know. My brain's getting foggy now. I've been talking a long time, haven't I? They were giving out these bags for free from Dark Horse Comics, although Dark Horse did not have a booth there. But that was really handy, so I ended up getting 2 of these bags to carry around stuff that I was buying. This bag has stuff in it. I bought a bunch of... Oh, there's even more comics in here a bunch of these holders for holding original art or prints. Because I don't see them at normal comic book stores. And one of them is currently just a storage place for this poster by Jim Steranko that I bought. The poster cost $20, and if I had wanted an autograph, I would have to pay an extra $20. Neil Adams gives you a free signature on anything you buy from him, but I guess not Jim Steranko. And this is a poster. I was amazed at how flimsy the paper is. And I don't know if he's been reprinting it over the years, or these are just like leftover in his storehouse of stuff from his media scene days. This is a poster that I used to see advertised in comics when I was a kid and in fanzines and stuff. And I had the impression that it was a character that Jim Steranko was going to come out with either in novels or comics, and I don't think he ever did. But my love of Steranko and my love of Conan made me... Oh, it says... That's weird. It says on it, rare Steranko print from 1968. It's on almost newsprint. And it says $30, but I paid $20 for it, so that's funny. But as a kid, I just loved this image, and I would just see tiny versions of it. Now I have a giant version of it. So I really wanted Steranko to do his Talon, his Conan. But I don't think he ever did. I think all he ever did was this poster. But I could be wrong. The coloring's very neat for 1968. I wonder if this is the actual 1968 paper. There's a little... Oh, damn. There's a little rip right here in the corner from where it's been folded. Since 1968? I don't think so, but I don't believe it's that old. Oh, well. Easy come, easy go. What they had was they had an open version of it that said $20 on it, and underneath they had 3 or 4 folded copies, and they just reached under and gave me one of the folded copies. I guess I should have opened it up to see that rip there, or maybe that rip appeared. I thought I did open it up briefly. Maybe that rip has just happened now, the paper being so old or something. Oh well. Anyway, I think that covers... Probably other... There's definitely other people I talked to, but I should have talked even more. Hopefully the next time I go to a con, I feel a higher energy. Hopefully this con continues and is a little more crowded next year, but still not very crowded. That would be great. And that they get their act together on running panels. Maybe most people just don't care about panels anyway. Maybe that's why they were... I worry about that and think, well, maybe they'll just decide to stop having panels. But my favorite thing, I think, is going to when the panels are good, going to the panels. And maybe if I get better at it, talking to the artists and writers at their tables and not feeling like I have to buy something from them to talk with them. Poor Aaron Loprenzi talked with me for quite a while, and I was going to buy something, but then got pushed away. Okay, talk to you all later.